Good afternoon, everybody. Again, I'm Charles Raether, managing partner here at AmLaw Group. And in our latest episode today on E-2 visa, I've got our business development director, Alexander Verbitsky. Alex, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, and if you've been following our podcast recently, Alex and I have been doing a series of podcasts related to, in particular, E-2 visas. With a particular focus on Canadian clients, since we have a large number of clients from Canada. And today, Alex and I were going to talk about, we're kind of going narrow, do a deep dive into a particular industry where we see a lot of promising opportunities, both for us as immigration attorneys and our clients who are working in that field. And that in particular is plumbing. So we thought today, Alex, right, we talk about maybe a scenario, and you're on the front lines working with, inquiries and people asking about this stuff. And I think, as you know, with tradespeople in general and plumbers in particular, you've been fielding a lot of inquiries.
Yeah, 100%. A lot of people that I'm talking to like vary in trades, right? So they come in as tile installers, electricians, and plumbers. Okay, a lot of landscapers as well. But yeah, they have interesting questions that I'm pretty sure we're going to be able to answer today over this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds good. Well, so if and you're probably in a better position than I am, Alex, to kind of talk about the plumbing industry. Not that you've personally done it, but what are the most common questions that you get maybe from people that have a plumbing business in Canada and they're looking at the U.S. I mean, are these people looking at starting from scratch in the U.S.? Are they thinking of buying an existing company here? Are they going to transfer people and assets from Canada? What do you often see during your call?
Yeah, so what I see in the questions that I have is with regards to or scenarios that I see. It's the tradespeople that are looking to not close down with their operations in Canada. Okay, they've built a really really good book of business in Canada, and just to shut it down, it's just a lost income, right? So people are not necessarily looking to sort of take everything they have, sell it, or transfer it over to their U.S. company and just start fresh there. They still want some sort of free cash flow happening, while they're setting up their U.S. business, right? So I think, some questions, it really comes down to like, how do I start? What are the possibilities? Most people that are looking to open up a business in the U.S., this is going to be their first time opening up a business in the U.S. So it's sort of foreign territory for them, or it's just like, even though, we speak the same language, okay, we still have a similar culture. The idea of, just crossing a border, it's like, what needs to be done? Well, of course, everyone wants to follow, the correct guidelines in order to get an approved visa, right? At the end of the day, the opening of the business doesn't matter because they've done it before.
Right.
Okay. It's just a matter of being within the guidelines.
You know what? This is an interesting question. Maybe it's a topic for a future podcast. I'm kind of curious, the process of setting up a business, is it easier or more difficult than in Canada or the US? Like you said, I mean, the idea, okay, of course there's differences when you're coming down to the US, but I think there's obviously a lot of similarities, but I'm just kind of curious. And I suppose a lot depends on the province or the state as well. I mean, I suppose in Canada as well. I mean, is there a big difference between provinces in terms of ease of opening a business or not? I'm not sure. I don't
Not sure either.
all right,
Not
all
sure
right.
either.
All right, we'll bring in some other people next time to talk about that. But yeah, so if you're looking, so say if you've got a plumbing business, you have a successful plumbing business in Canada, and believe me, there's always a shortage of skilled tradespeople, I would say, in the U.S., whether it's plumbing, electrical, stuff like that. I think there's always demand, and you want to come down here. If we look at it in the context of an E-2 visa, just like any other E-2 visa, what we've got to do is you've got to put it roughly about $100,000 into your U.S. business. Now, you could do that by putting cash in, and then we've got to show, that you have spent probably at least $50,000 to $60,000 by the time you file for the visa, and then we have to show the remaining funds are earmarked, under binding contracts that you've executed either for lease agreements or employment or other stuff. And so I guess there's two ways of doing it, and I don't know from your experience in talking with clients, Alex, do people prefer just putting $100K in cash? Or, I suspect a lot of people aren't aware they could just take some of their assets from Canada, transfer them into the U.S. company.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So, the clients that we have now that are plumbers and the ones that I speak to, I mean, I can see or I can hear their eyes open up over the phone when I tell them that they could do an asset transfer.
Right.
Okay, that they could just simply take the equipment and tools that they own and transfer it over to the US LLC. Okay. So it becomes this whole opportunity, even though that they're well prepared to, take that $100,000 and inject it into the U.S. business's bank account, right? It just makes I feel that the weight of the shoulder or the weight on the shoulders, decreases a little bit when you let them know that.
Yeah, and especially, yeah, right. So the client might be in a bit of a cash crunch. They might not have 100,000 free just lying around, but they might have an extra truck, up there in Ontario or some other equipment they're not really using to its full capacity. And, you get, I want to say you get a one-to-one credit on what you contribute into the U.S. company, meaning, we need to get some kind of appraisal or third-party validation of the value of that equipment. But let's say you've got a truck with, whatever, and, the truck's worth 50 grand or something like 50,000. So, if we just get some kind of appraisal, and you just contribute that truck to the company, you're making a big step towards fulfilling that financial obligation for the E-2. You're also, I'm not an accountant, but I'm pretty sure you're avoiding, I think, I might be wrong, you're avoiding some tax consequences, right? Because if you're, making an in-kind transfer, I think, I guess that's a good question. If it goes off the books of the Canadian company and goes on the books of the U.S. company, that might be treated as a taxable, matter or transaction. But you know what? I think they would base it off of the book value of the equipment. So the equipment might have a book value of zero, right? Because of depreciation over the years. Maybe it might only have a value of 5,000, but it's really worth, in real terms, maybe 50,000, something like that. Again, you need to talk to your accountant. But yeah, so it's kind of killing two birds with one stone.
Yeah, and it's definitely not limited just to their work trucks, right? I mean, there's so many tools that the plumbers have in let's say in the storage at their warehouse, and also the main tools that they keep on themselves every single day, right? So we're talking about camera systems, we're talking about pipe threading. If you're, let's say, a plumber that's installing sewer mains and whatnot, okay, let's say on a more commercial side, I mean, you've got excavators, you got trailers, right? All of that can be pushed towards an asset transfer to sort of fund your U.S. business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that to keep in mind is, what was I going to say? Gosh, I forgot what I was going to say. But anyway, that can do it, and that can go a good ways towards moving forward with the E-2 process. Now, just to make it clear, if you contribute, a few trucks that are worth 50,000 each, is that sufficient to file for your E-2? Probably not, right? The government's going to want to see at least some cash in there. So, you might put two trucks in, contribute them in kind, and they're together worth 100K. But, we need to put some cash in there to show that, the business has some operating capital, cover payroll, other things, stuff like that. So, let's say, I'm just making up these numbers, but let's say, your truck and equipment are worth 50,000. Sure, you could put in, maybe another 40, 50,000 in cash. And I think that would be more than adequate, to get things.
So, Charles, is there a ratio that we go by when it comes to how much cash you should have in the bank and how much you've spent, or what the valuation of your assets are? Like, I'm assuming, we operate by a $60,000 spend, 40,000 earmarked for future expenses, right? So, if you take that ratio and let's say, the plumber, for a one-man team, okay, they need one truck and then a whole a lot of equipment, right? That, let's say, costs $60,000. Let's say that's what it's costed, that it costed him, okay? That 40,000 is in the bank account. But now if they bring two trucks in, would you say that $80,000 is required, or is there some sort of ratio, let's say, add another 50% on top of that cash requirement?
Well, yeah, good question. I don't know if there's really a ratio per se for that type of situation. I would just say, so let's say they put two trucks in, and the two trucks together are worth 80,000. Again, here's a critical thing. Assuming you're opening a new business in the U.S., we're going to have to prepare a business plan, and in that business plan, there's a lot of flexibility. A plan is a plan. And so there's a lot of flexibility. And so if we know you're contributing 80,000 worth of equipment and vehicles, I wouldn't say there's a ratio per se, like out of that 80,000, how much additional in cash do we need to contribute? But it has to kind of make business sense. And so maybe we finesse it. I don't want to say we finesse it, but each case we kind of look at individually based on, what the financial projections are, what the cash flow projections are. Let's understand these officers are not financial analysts at the embassy. So as long as it kind of, passes the smell test, like you look at the business plan, like, yeah, this kind of makes sense. The guy says, my average job is, $500 to do. And I have, 10 calls a day. I'm making 5,000 a day. And, and as long as you can show that whatever cash they're putting in is adequate to fund, their expected, expenditures and stuff like that, it should work out.
Perfect. Listen, I have another question. Okay, for the plumbing companies out there in Canada that want to enter the U.S. market, what would you suggest is the best stepping stone? Okay, to, let's say, full force inject capital and build a team of, let's say, 3 trucks, okay, and a few plumbers, or you know what? Let's just get your visa. Let's do the minimum requirement. Get that 1 truck. All the tools and equipment required for that 1 truck. Make that investment. Once we get your visa, then you could just come in full force and force inject capital and start expanding.
That's a good question. At first I thought, I'm not really sure how to respond to that. And then I thought about it, and I think I do have a good answer. I would say definitely better to go the slower route. Why do I say that? I mean, you might be very confident about your business expansion plans here in the U.S. You might have local partners. You might know the local market really well. So you're very confident about how this is all going to go. But if you're like most people, and you want to play it safe, you don't want to take unnecessary risks, I would say start small. Do what's necessary for getting the visa. Once you get the visa as a Canadian, you're going to get it for 5 years. You're pretty much free for 5 years until you need to renew it. And the renewal is very basic and simple for Canadians. So it's not a big deal even to renew it. So I would say just do what's necessary to get the visa. Because, why do I say that? Because in the off chance that, you have a problem with the visa, you might get a denial. I mean, full disclosure here, we've never had a denial for a Canadian E-2 client ever. So I get, as I say this, the chances are pretty darn low, especially if we're talking about Canadians. The chances are pretty low that you're going to get a denial, but you never know. Or maybe there's a delay in issuing your visa, because let's say they see something in your past history. Like we had one guy from Canada, software kind of developer, IT guy, got approved, no big problem. But he had, I can't remember the details, maybe kind of a domestic violence thing in his past. And it wasn't a conviction or anything. It was just, there was an issue in the past. He knew it was likely to raise some questions at the embassy, and it did. And his approval was put on pause for, I can't remember exactly, but somewhere between 3 and 6 months. He finally got it approved, but so everything was fine. And everything went as we expected. It just took a lot longer. So just imagine, like if you're going full bore, you're buying equipment for 3 teams, and you got these 3 teams ready to go, and you're sitting there in Toronto waiting for the actual visa to get issued because they got to check something in your background. That's probably going to be a bummer for people.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, listen, here's okay. Let's say we get them the visa now. Okay. So they did the bare minimum requirement, and now they want to start expanding. I don't think a lot of people understand how you could expand your team using Canadian talent, using the team that you have and bringing them over to the States, right? So if you could tell us a little bit more about what the E-2 employee entails, especially for like right-hand men, right? Right-hand people that, really lead and you trust in the plumbing industry, that you could leave them alone and they could take on the task on a daily basis.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I think a lot of people who are familiar with E-2, they all assume, okay, everybody's got to invest 100,000, and if I don't have 100,000, I can't do it. No, there's a really sometimes overlooked option with E-2 that is for employees. So once the investor, the owner of the Canadian, let's say U.S. business, he gets his or her E-2 as the investor. He can bring down his staff. Now, generally, it has to be what's called an essential employee. So an essential employee is usually somebody that's, a little bit higher level, like you said, right-hand man, maybe a foreman, maybe, senior, whatever, senior plumber, whatever, that they've got more experience. It doesn't have to be somebody very senior in stature. It could be maybe a junior person, and maybe that junior person is going to come here and train, the locals here or something, or that person is just going to kind of head up the office, or like you said, they want to expand. With their initial application, they filed and said, "Hey, we're going to open up, a shop in, Tampa, and now we want to open up something in Orlando too." So you need more people, and that's kind of the beauty of this essential employee E-2 visa. You can bring down your qualified employees without investing any more money. And they don't even have to have work experience with you back in Canada. Say they were working for a competitor and you were able to recruit them over. They never worked with you in Canada, that's fine. I mean, as long as we can show that, they could be deemed an essential employee, and we show what their activities down here are going to be, that there's, sufficiently, senior activities. That's a way you can certainly help fuel your growth. And we're dealing with that issue right now with a couple from Canada. They've been doing construction for a long time, up in Canada. They moved down to Tennessee recently with their E-2, and they want to expand. They do a lot of window installations, and they just can't find the qualified people here. So they want to bring their guys down from Canada and do that.
Yeah. What a great opportunity, though, right? Like,
Yeah,
I was just listening to you speak about it, and I was just thinking that, oh my goodness, someone doesn't have to actually work for this employer in Canada. They could just be someone that's seeking employment as a plumber.
Yeah.
And, someone could post a classified ad saying, if you want to move to the United States,
that's
okay,
right.
and you're a licensed plumber, okay, come and join my team.
That's
right?
actually, that's a very good idea. Yeah, you can start recruiting.
Yeah,
for some
sure
people,
there's
the
gonna
ability
be
to work in the U.S. is a plus. For whatever reason, warmer weather, whatever.
I know so many people, right? Like the conversations that I have, a lot of the time is, like I'm a junior plumber, okay, or I just got my, I just became fully licensed, okay, but I don't have that capital, right? And but I still want to move to the United States. And believe me, there's so many people like that in Canada, and this is the opportunity. So if you're out there listening that you want to move your company down, well, here's another opportunity that you could present to employees, your future employees, is you could advertise in Canada, get them that E-2 visa, E-2 employee visa, and they'll be stuck with you, right? Because their E-2 employee visa, okay, is they only get a work authorization to work for your company, okay? So they can't get poached by, a competitor or whatnot, okay? Because once they start working for someone else, that's a big no-no.
Yeah, right. They'll lose their status, they lose their visa and everything. Yeah, that's a good marketing recruiting tool that they could use. Absolutely. Now, here's the one hitch, and I don't think this would come up many times, but it could. Those employees also have to be Canadian. So if the owner's Canadian, all the employees have to be Canadian. So if they're living in Canada, they're residents, but they're citizens of the UK or something like that, that's not going to work. But as long as they're Canadians, yeah, they could recruit just anybody off the street, and that's pretty interesting. I never thought of that. So there you go. That there, boy, great expansion plan, and that's how you can, expand your business. And you might say, hey, maybe that, the Canadian client you're talking to is already operating at 100%. He's like, I can't send all these guys out because we're going to lose all the Canadian business, but you can recruit other people, maybe from other competitors in Canada, say, hey, I'll send you down to the US for a while to work.
That's it. Right on.
Yeah. Interesting.
Well, I'm pretty sure this is going to give a whole lot of knowledge, especially to our future plumbing clients of ours that want to expand their business into the US and just get that going. And we're obviously here to make that happen for you. So feel free to reach out to us.
Absolutely. Maybe in closing, we could talk about one issue that comes up with plumbers, but also other people as well, which would be, what if somebody, plumber comes to us and says, I don't have 100,000 worth to, that I could invest, even if I include my equipment. Or let's say, hey, I've got all my equipment and tools and everything, and all together, it's maybe 40,000, and I don't have the remaining 60,000 to invest. Can I go ahead and still do an E-2, or how could I make that work? Right? I don't know if you have questions like that with people who come to you a lot of times. They might say, hey, can't I, if I don't have the money right now, can I still do it?
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, there's a lot of times that people come to me and across various different business ideas. Okay. They say exactly that. I don't have the money. Okay. Let's say I only have $40,000 to inject into a business. What can I do? And I think a very common question that people ask is, can I reinvest the earnings that I get from my business in the US
Right.
to sort of act as an investment to be recognized for the E-2 visa application?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the short answer is yes. I mean, you can. Now, so let's say sometimes people, they might start the business. Maybe the clients come to you already and he started the business in the US and then he heard about this E2 thing and he says, well, I've only put 20,000 in. There's not much more I need to invest or I can invest. You can use earnings from the business in the US to reach that threshold. The only catch is that you've got to take that money out of the US company and then reinvest it. So if the company, you put 20,000 in, let's say the company generated 50,000 in net profit this year, you can count that 50,000 towards this 100,000 for the E2 only if you take it out of the company, pay whatever taxes you have to pay, whatever that might be, and then put it back into the company, right? And we've had people do that quite often, including a lot of Canadians. Like, for example, this isn't quite in the field of plumbing and electrical work, but we had a guy who had an SEO company. So, search engine optimization, kind of the digital marketing. They optimize sites, help their clients, market better and stuff like that. And as you can imagine, even, unlike plumbers and electricians, there's no equipment. I mean, they have a couple laptops, they have people working. I mean, he's like, what do I invest in? And what we said was, look, and he had a flexible timetable. He didn't need to get to the US real quick. We said, here, move over your existing, as many clients as you have, move them over from your Canadian company to your US company. So you're invoicing your Canadian and US clients through the US company. You start generating income there. You take out those earnings, just turn around and put them right back in. You start running a lot of your expenditures through the U.S. company. So, they don't have a lot of equipment and capital costs, but they were traveling to, events or stuff or some trade shows. They put the payroll all over on the U.S. company, right? So then they could show all these expenditures it was making. So he'd say, okay, we made $20,000 last year. They take the $20,000 out, turn it around, put it back in, spend it all on salaries, lease, office expenditures, stuff like that. And in the course of a year and a half, by that time, yeah, he had spent 100,000. I mean, it's pretty easy to spend 100K in running a business. And at that point, we could say, okay, here you spent 100,000. Sure, it wasn't all at once. It was over the course of a year and a half. And that way, then we went ahead and filed the E2. So
yeah, very interesting. I mean, like definitely more so doable with the online based consulting businesses, right? Let's say IT consulting, any sort of consulting.
well, you mean, I guess, to work
really.
remotely before they move to the US, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, good
exactly.
point.
Exactly. Right. Like you could run expenses through the business account. Okay. Pay your employees wherever they are, or let's say contractors wherever they are, and incur those expenses. And then once you've reached that threshold, you submit the application
Yeah,
and you
yeah,
can start
exactly.
moving in,
And here's
right?
a good thing too that makes this easier than what people think sometimes. You don't have to pay these people in the US, meaning it's not like these employees or contractors don't have to be in the US, right? You could have contractors in Canada, overseas somewhere, right? These are just expenditures that they look at of the US company. They don't have to be expenditures on US personnel, US products, stuff like that. Or we have people like with Amazon a lot of times, right? Similar situation. They just might buy, they put the money into the US company. They buy a container load of, plastic chairs that they sell on Amazon from China, right? And they can show the invoices. Here, we spent 30,000 for a container load of chairs. We sold them on Amazon. We made, 30,000 off of it. Recognize that income, put it back in the company, bought another container, right? And so after you spent, so it's not that difficult. Not that difficult.
Yeah, I mean, great business, right? I have actually spoken to about 2 or 3 people this week that are in the wholesale business, okay? Whether that means tile and stone, whether that means products for, one of them was a water company, okay? And they wanted to essentially purchase water from Quebec, okay, and distribute it in the United States,
You mean bottled
right?
water?
So
Bottled water?
bottled water,
Oh,
bottled
okay,
water.
okay, I
Yeah.
get you. All
Yeah.
right.
A bottled water company in Quebec, okay, that wants to distribute water in the States, right? So they technically, like, if they have already buyers for their bottled water,
Yeah, yeah.
they don't have to set foot in the States, right? They can start operating their company, okay, have the expenses to, buy a few skids of bottled water, have it shipped and distributed by their distributors in the States, and you didn't have to enter the States, right? And like, obviously, there's so many businesses out there available, that people are running or that would give you an idea of, oh, I'd be interested in that, especially for a lot of our leads that come in, also want ideas of businesses to get involved in. It's very difficult on our side to come up with. I love business ideas. I told one person, I said, listen, if we start talking about business ideas, we'll be on this call for 2 hours, right? Like, I have an ample amount of ideas for you, right? Do you resonate with it? No, not necessarily, right? So, but I think these stories definitely give people ideas of what's possible, what qualifies them for the E2, right? A lot of time people come in and they say, what business does qualify, right? As if that there is some sort of, I guess, like industry that is only acceptable for
Right,
the
like
E2
yeah,
visa.
like H1B.
And it
It's all
turns
tech
out,
guys. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it turns out sky's the limit. I always tell them, sky's the limit. You can open up any business you want, large and
For the
small.
most part, yeah, for the most part. That's one of the great advantages of an E2. Yeah, it's just very flexible, very applicable. So, well, good. I think this was helpful. Hopefully, it's helpful for our viewers and help them kind of get some ideas, get the juices running in terms of what would work for business. And as like Alex said, he'll spend hours talking to you about business ideas if you reach him on the phone. So be considerate of his time. But no, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I mean that's part of our job. We're not business brokers per se. But yeah, it's usually easiest if a client comes to us, they might have a few ideas, A, B, C, and we're happy to kind of evaluate and say, hey, this might work best. This might work, second best, stuff like that from an E2 perspective and
Exactly.
help put together a package that's effective. So anyway, well, good chatting again, Alex, and hope to see you on our next episode soon enough. We'll talk all things related to U.S. immigration.
Looking forward to it.
All right. Sounds
Thanks,
good.
Charles.
Thank you. Thanks.
Cheers.
Cheers.